We'll start the event in a minute. Okay, there we go. So the event is live. We'll give it another minute or so, or a few seconds for people to join. Or we'll just start now. All right, everybody. Thank you for being here. Audience and panelists, thank you for giving us your time. Share with us your expertise and your experience. This panel is intended to be a conversation with relevant academic experts, organizers, and activists that will discuss the politicization of genocide from the context of their nations and their communities. And at the end, we'll have time, if we have time, for the audience to ask questions, and we could add that in there as well. My name is Haig Minasyan. I'm the chair of the United Human Rights Council since 2019. I'll be your moderator today. The United Human Rights Council is a grassroots human rights org based here in Southern California. We have a global focus on human rights activism, for example, collaborating and creating events such as this one today in order to foster that solidarity between communities. And it's so much better when we get to work together, to get to work with another org like OmniTigray, who really put in a lot of the work for this event to happen today. So Maeza, if you want to speak a little bit about OmniTigray.
Yes, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. OmniTigray, it's a non-profit organization established in response to the ongoing Tigray genocide happening in Tigray, Ethiopia. It's established by young Tagaru professionals. We aim to end the ongoing genocide of the Tigray people, but we also advocate for the protection and well-being of minority groups across the world. Basically, it's a voluntary group. We're trying to push an educated advocacy regarding the genocide happening in Tigray, Ethiopia. And we're very glad that we're able to connect with you guys and to discuss about, our commonly shared struggles and find solution towards them.
Sounds good. No, thank you again for the collaboration and all your work that you guys are doing for your community. It's amazing. And but like you're mentioning with what's happening in Tigray, we've had another very disturbing year of new atrocities, unprevented and without consequences. Another year of ineffective and unwilling international organizations to do what they're supposed to do, to implement the mechanisms in place for human rights to be a priority, for genocide prevention, to help foster justice deserved. The world seems to be getting increasingly chaotic and distracted, which seems to be encouraging for oppressive regimes to get their hands dirty again. With every genocide unpunished, with every genocide denied and ignored, we, the human race, are empowering the next crime against humanity to take place. But I also wanted to take a moment, you guys, to shed light on the eviction and shelling that's been taking place in Palestine this past week, these past decades. The UHRC holds these events in an effort to show solidarity with other communities, to bring us together, and how our struggles are all connected and one. And that panels such as these are intended to be applicable for all people. Our discussions and our activism is for everybody and relevant and useful for all of us experiencing genocide and injustice. You guys, our panelists, will be discussing their experience and work for their communities, but the lessons we learn are really for everybody. So up until 1948, there was no consequence to a state committing genocide upon its own population. It would be argued as internal affairs, and foreign entities had no right or legal capacity to get involved. Only after the Holocaust did the world listen to Raphael Lemkin, an early scholar on genocide, and the man who coined the term genocide based on what happened to the Armenians in World War I and then the Holocaust in World War II. And for years leading up to 1948, even before World War II, he was campaigning for some sort of international mechanism to prevent and punish genocide. And as a student, he would ask his teachers, how come when an individual is killed by another individual, it's murder, and they go to court, they're punished. But when a nation is murdered, there's no such consequences for the person or entities responsible. Questions such as these forged his academic and human rights effort, and only after the Holocaust did his campaign come into fruition, known as the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which was unanimously adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. But despite having this resolution, this international mechanism for prevention and punishment of genocide, it still happened. It's still happening again and again. Some even call the 20th century the century of genocide because it happened so many times. It continued to happen because the international community prefers political expediency and their special interests as a priority over human rights. So I remember talking to someone recently and they were like, why are you asking for reparations for the Armenian genocide? It would make Turkey less willing to recognize it as an event as genocide, so why ask for it? And I remember thinking to myself, like, what's the point then? What's the point if the perpetrating state doesn't face any consequences? It's not just about the perpetrator accepting their state's guilt, a historical fact, but it's about creating solid foundations for future reconciliation to take place in order for there to be lasting peace. There needs to be consequences for war crimes, genocide, ethnic cleansing, if we hope to prevent them in the future. And I could tell you, as an Armenian whose genocide has been denied for over a century, whose community still faces that existential threat in our homeland up until today, that none of our oppressions, that our oppression will not end, your oppression will not end if justice is not achieved. You can't just move on. Real justice is needed because the genocide does not evaporate in its own vacuum of time. It becomes part of your society and the effects of which transcend generations. And again, as an Armenian, I'd say I'm proud of my community because we haven't given up. After 100 years of gaslighting and denialism and seemingly against the odds against major powers, we still haven't given up. So the act of genocide is political in itself, especially when the actors are states themselves, which means that the prosecution and intervention of genocide becomes inevitably politicized by the guilty parties and the international community. We see historical revisionism, erasure, gaslighting, lack of action, being selective, at the expense of politics between nations. Historical facts, our truths, are debated and then utilized or ignored depending on a state's agenda, political expediency. So, this virtual panel event will explore a discourse that strives to raise awareness about the genocides committed against ethnic minorities, including the Tigrayans, Armenians, Uyghurs, Rohingyans, and several others. The conversation will also inspect how genocide can be employed as a political tool and how its denialism became a battlefront for many communities. So thank you again for everyone being here. I'd like to start off the event with everyone giving some background on who you are and your current activities and the work you do in human rights, and then we'll begin the discussion afterwards. And for anyone, for the audience, feel free to comment any questions that you might have, and we'll add it to our list. And if we have time at the end, we'll talk about it then. But Meaza, if you would like to start, give us some background in the work that you do.
Yes, sure. Thank you again. My name is Muazza Gidey Governmentin. I am from Tigray. I am part of OmniTigray. As I said, OmniTigray is a non-profit organization that focuses on advocating for the protection and well-being of the Tigrayan people, but also other oppressed people in the world. I am an international relations researcher. I recently graduated from graduate school. I just finished my master's degree in international relations. Prior to that, I did my undergraduate studies in South Korea, where I graduated from Kyung University with honors on international studies. Currently, myself and my sisters and brothers at OmniTigray were pushing for educated advocacy and demanding that the international community puts pressure on the Ethiopian government as well as Amhara militias and the Eritrean government to stop the ongoing genocide that they have waged on the people of Tigray since November 4th of last year. That's what we do, and very much happy to be on this platform with you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Meaza. Rayhan, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Rayhan Asad. I am a Uyghur attorney, human rights lawyer, and advocate. I come from the Uyghur community, which is now, according to several world democracies, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Canada is right now facing an ongoing genocide, just by virtue of being Uyghur or other Turkic minority. So far, right now, we have more than millions of people are in the Chinese government's concentration camps, and there's news of forced sterilization, torture, waterboarding, all sorts of mistreatments, including gang rapes are taking place in these camps. And unfortunately and incredibly sadly, in this crisis, nobody can escape, including my own family, and my brother is actually in one of those camps at the moment. So my fight has been trying to push policy changes, but as well as using my legal background to make sure that I free my brother, and as well as elevate this cause to make sure that public is informed and we have more people on our end to end this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Raihan. And it reminds me how genocide is so personal for all of us. You know, all our families have gone through it, let's say. So, Alex, if you could give us some background and the work you do.
Thank you, Haig, and thank you, everyone. It's such a privilege and an honor to be here amongst such esteemed activists in their fields. My name is Alex Galitsky. I'm Communications Director of the Armenian National Committee of America's Western Region. The ANCA is the largest Armenian American grassroots organization in the United States, and we work on a range of issues advancing the Armenian cause and the interests of the Armenian people, both here in the United States as a community, as descendants of survivors of the Armenian genocide, as well as our communities in Armenia currently suffering genocide at the hands of Azerbaijan. We've witnessed in recent months and weeks, and in fact recent days, the continued onslaught, intimidation, violence, dehumanization, and violation of the Armenian people's right to self-determination and their sovereignty. And I hope that through events like these, we'll be able to build these bridges of solidarity and combat the ongoing abuses and atrocities perpetrated under the nose of the international community the world over. So it's an absolute privilege and pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And then Saifullah, if you could give us some background in your work that you do.
Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you all the organizers who work hard to make this event a reality. My name is Saifullah Mohammed. I'm now living in Canada, in Kitchener. I'm a student of peace and conflict doing my master at the University of Waterloo. I am myself a Rohingya from Myanmar. We call it Burma. So I was a refugee in my whole life. I was in Bangladesh refugee camps. Then I was in Thailand and Malaysia. And then in 2016, I came to Canada. And there are about 1,000 Rohingya all over Canada. We do have an organization called Canadian Rohingya Development Initiative. There's a youth-based organization with some non-Rohingya participants as well. We have been working closely to bring the Rohingya genocide at the world stage. So the Rohingya issue is a very complex issue because there are different issues all over the world, like our brothers and sisters facing the genocide in Uyghur, Omna Tigray, and then Armenians, Palestinians, and in some other places. But the Rohingya issue is so complex in Myanmar because we are really in small and ethnic groups who are really different from others in Myanmar, religiously, ethnically, linguistically, everything different. So recently we do have a lot of issues with ICJ and so many places. So we have been trying to work together with international NGOs, human rights organizations, Canadian governments, and we have been pushing hard. And you know, all the problem is greater than solutions at this moment. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Saifullah. And thank you, everybody, for being here. You guys are all doing amazing work in your fields and inspirations. So want to give a quick description of the definition of genocide. Genocide is a systematic, intentional action to destroy a people, usually defined as an ethnic, national, racial, or religious group, in whole or in part. So I know we almost started touching upon it, but I'd like our panelists to have a chance to share with us their community's cause and current situation, maybe a little background. How has the genocide been perpetrated? What are the factors of your community's genocide? And what are the driving forces of your genocide? Meaza, if you can start.
Sure. So the Tigray genocide has been happening for over 6 months now, and it's mainly being committed by the Ethiopian government alongside its national army, as well as a neighboring country called Eritrea, and also local militant group called Amhara and Fano militias. These actors have been committing genocidal crimes upon the people of Tigray, as I said, for over 6 months now in the darkness. And some of the driving factors of this genocidal acts are hate towards the people of Tigray, which has been fueled by the Ethiopian federal government's use of dehumanizing words such as daytime highness and others, and also massive disregard to the people's democratic right self-determination. Um, on September 9th of 2020, the Tigray people, they decided to use and exercise their constitutional and democratic right to elect their local government representatives. And now, because of that exercise of democracy, the Ethiopian federal government is punishing the people of Tigray collectively using genocidal tactics. So the main reason why, over 5.2 million people are facing man-made famine, and girls are being gang raped by military arms is mainly because they decided to exercise their constitutional right, and democracy is being used as a crime punishable by genocide acts in Ethiopia. So the root cause of the suffering and the genocide happening in Tigray is hate towards the people of Tigray, at the same time disregard for the people's right to self-determination.
Which is a theme we see in most genocides everywhere. So, Saifullah, if you could give us the driving factors of your community's genocide, give us some background.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. The Rohingya people are an ethnic group of Burma with own religions, culture, identity, and their values. They face a long history of severe discriminations and persecutions, violence, denial of citizenships, and numerous restrictions at the hand of Burmese authorities. Myanmar doesn't recognize them and uprooted their citizenship. And recently in Bangladesh, Bangladeshi government doesn't call them refugees. Development agencies use them displaced people from Myanmar. So this is a genocide based on rewriting history, on creating new might and narratives that deny our roots in the land. There are powerful forces that use stories to displace us from our homeland. So there are also several issues. This genocide, Rohingya genocide, is not recently started. It is called slow burning genocide. So, but international community recently came to know that in 2016 and 17, and some of the Rohingya remaining, most of the Rohingya are now in Bangladesh and other countries as refugee. They were driven out, they were uprooted from their villages. But some of the only 600,000 Rohingya are living in the camps, in IDP camps, in the villages in Burma, in Rakhine State, are subjected to oppressive and systematic restrictions on freedom of movement. Just now, access to food, healthcare, and humanitarian assistance, all kind of difficulties they have been facing just now, even in this pandemic. So there's the brief genocide, ongoing genocide in Burma.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Saifullah. Raihan, if you could give us some background in the driving factors and driving forces of what's happening in Uyghurstan.
So I think, Saifullah, I think you raised a really good point. We need to understand that, every crimes against humanity is very much different. Personally, I don't like using the word genocide because it reminds me, I think, this painful reality that what's happening. and I find it so interesting when people think that you do want to use this term. Actually, we don't. As a lawyer, like, I want to make sure that that the crime does reflect a proper name, but at the same time, like, it's incredibly painful. That being said, I think what the Uyghur community is grappling with is this very unprecedented repression that we've never seen. The reason why I say that is because we are facing a superpower. The world's second most powerful country, whether militarily, economically, and in many fashion. But on top of that, and what makes this uniquely challenging and also frightening is that, China is also like technologically and sophisticated country. So it really creates an opportunity to conceal the truth and make sure that the world doesn't know about what's happening. So especially the Uyghur community, by and large, are located in the far west region of China. And it has been historically isolated from international access. And during the past 5 years, this crisis has started in 2014 with the Chinese government's very brutal campaign called Strike Hard. And they frame the issue as like fighting against extremism, terrorism, and so forth. I even don't like to use their propaganda language to justify what it is doing. But it's been going on for 5 years, and only until late last year we started calling it genocide, because again, genocide is a term we don't want to very easily throw around. But because the crisis has been going on for so long, and in my view, it does meet every definition of the Genocide Convention. So we have a situation where Uyghur people are obviously historically discriminated, but also dehumanized. The Chinese government, their own language, used Uyghurs as they use like a tumor to describe Uyghur people, and they called Uyghur people have mental disease, like, and those kind of, and they even the Chinese government official here in America use that Uyghur people are not normal, and that kind of dehumanizing language often leads to discrimination. And right now, like, we have millions of people in the concentration camps, and they're persecuted. And as the crisis evolved, now many people are being sentenced without trial, and sometimes a secret trial, or just handed over sentence in the detention camp. And you are totally cut off with the rest of the world. Like, your family wouldn't even know if you're sentenced. So that's one thing. And then there's obviously, and this initially when the crisis targeted particularly a men of particular age group between 20 to like 45, like that's in the eyes of the Chinese government considered to be a threat to its own legitimacy and so forth. So initially targeted men, but often, and I think this is why the Genocide Convention forecasted that often when genocide takes place, it does evolve to women, children, and that's why we do have all these categories. And women are forcibly sterilized, and there was like, the Chinese government called this a becoming family policy, where they arranged millions of Han citizen into the home, Uyghur homes, and monitor people. And sometimes, like, it's actually women alone while their husband gone in these prison camps, and they have no agency, no voice, but they left at the mercy of this Han civilian. And I think it inevitably leads to sexual abuse. And even in these camps, when people have no power, nothing, they can't even defend themselves, obviously, and ultimately, and I think we've heard about rapes taking place in these camps. So what happens to the children then? So and not only the parents, actually grandparents, like, of these families are also taken to the camps, and the children are taken away by the state, and now they're raised in like state orphanage schools without the parents' embrace or love. So, and that's why, like, this crisis in particular has sort of shown all the categories, and it's just so well orchestrated in some ways, and it is a state sanctioned violence against a particular ethnic group that has been historically discriminated. And I think that's what we're seeing right now, and it's been unfortunately an ongoing crisis and 5 years in the making and beyond, and that is what truly breaks my heart.
It breaks my heart too. I mean, and so many of those elements you mentioned, reminds me of the Armenian genocide and a lot of the other genocides I've seen. So it's definitely genocide. But Alex, if you want to talk about the Armenian genocide, but also kind of the present situation as well, how that connects to modern day.
I mean, I think a lot of what's been said already describes some very common features of genocide. Like Raihan mentioned, all genocides are very unique in the way that they're perpetrated and the preparation that goes into them. But I think there are these defining characteristics of genocide that remain constant in many ways. I mean, the Armenian genocide, the initial act of genocide that we refer to happened 160 years ago, but you could easily say that had been happening for decades, if not centuries, before that point, with the systematic discrimination of Armenians and other Christian minorities in the Ottoman Empire, how they were persecuted, treated as second-class citizens, and abused, even in some cases enslaved. The process of genocide took place as a very deliberate, systematic extermination of over 3/4 of the Armenian population of the Ottoman Empire, or 1.5 million Armenians, as well as a further million Greek and Assyrians. The motivations were largely based on the ultranationalism of the then young Turk Ottoman government that was involved in rounding up non-Turkish minorities and putting them through death marches where they would die of privation, or where women would be raped en masse, or where children would be taken from their families and raised by Turkish citizens, not knowing that they were ever Armenian, to breed the Armenian out of them. In some cases, they were wholesale massacres of Armenians. There was a very systematic process through which this took place, and as a result of that, there was a real effort within the international community to try and resolve the situation. As a result of the genocide, you actually saw a lot of the world come together in providing humanitarian assistance to Armenians. Even Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States at the time, who had taken a very keen interest in what was happening in the Ottoman Empire and the persecution of the Armenians, which had been widely reported throughout US media and international media, founded the idea of the League of Nations and self-determination as a structure within international law on the basis of the persecution of religious and ethnic minorities by the Ottoman Empire, and recognized the First Republic of Armenia as a sort of remedial response to what had happened during the genocide. And then, of course, as Haig mentioned in the introduction, Raphael Lemkin, in his defining of the term genocide, saw what was happening to the Armenians as integral to his own definition. But while the international community was trying to find ways, maybe imperfectly, to prevent and resolve this crime against humanity, the successors to the Ottoman Empire, the current Turkish Republic, sought to do what they could to deny what had happened, to ensure that history of genocide did not see the light of day. They took actions both constitutionally and legally to ensure that any mention of what had happened to the Armenians could not be taught in schools, that could not be mentioned anywhere in Turkish society. It was a very concerted effort to erase that history, partly out of a bid to appease the international community, and so as to ensure Turkey would join this community of nations and not be excluded from having a seat at that table. At the same time, there was also a demographic re-engineering ambition that was being undertaken by the Turkish government, this concept of demographic replacement, to the point at which, even after the formal process as we know it of genocide and the mass extermination had ended, Armenian, Greek, Assyrian, and other minority communities still faced routine pogroms, confiscation of cultural heritage and property, persecution under law, right up until this very day, where many the communities that were persecuted during the genocide are almost non-existent right now. What remains of those communities and their heritage and identity has also largely been erased, to where you visit ancient Armenian cities in the Armenian highlands, or what is today the Eastern Anatolian plateau. that don't bear any Armenian names, or that where Armenian any evidence of Armenian civilization has been erased. And that foundation of denial of this historic crime against humanity is what informs the persecution of Armenians today, largely now at the hands of Azerbaijan, but with the explicit support of Turkey. As many may be aware, last year Azerbaijan invaded the ethnic Armenian enclave of Artsakh, as we call it, or Nagorno-Karabakh, as it's most commonly known internationally. And this territory, in fact, was one of these areas where mass population, demographic re-engineering, genocide, extermination, massacres took place during the genocide 100 years ago. But this area is still being claimed by Turkey and Azerbaijan to this day. And that's informed a lot of violence against those communities. During the course of the war, civilian populations were routinely targeted. Schools, hospitals, churches, and other cultural sites were bombed and shelled by the Azerbaijani government. Even after a ceasefire agreement was signed in November, the violence continued in the occupied territory, where Azerbaijan was in the process of destroying and deconstructing churches, where prisoners of war captured by Azerbaijan have, by the accounts of international human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, suffered torture and extremely degrading abuse by the Azerbaijani government. And of course, we've also seen over the process of the last 30 years where this conflict has been simmering, the institutionalized dehumanization of Armenians. And I think this is another one of those kind of patterns of behavior we see amongst genocidal states is Armenians have been likened to a disease in Azerbaijan. Armenians have been, in fact, there was a commemorative postcard or postage stamp released after the war ended depicting Azerbaijanis in hazmat suits chemically disinfecting the Armenian areas of Artsakh and Nagorno-Karabakh as if they were getting rid of a virus, which is the way in which they likened the Armenian people to. And then most recently, they opened a war trophy exhibit where they displayed the helmets of Armenian soldiers killed in action and created these grotesque wax caricatures and models of Armenians dying or being captured and being tortured like some kind of sick genocide-themed amusement park. This is the sort of behavior we see that underpins any process of genocide throughout the world. You need to create a villain, an enemy of the other population, of the otherizing of a community, so that genocidal violence is not only able to be perpetrated, but is seen as permissible by the population at large, to enlist and recruit people as willing bystanders in the process of genocide, so that they don't ring the alarm bells. And unfortunately, that's what we've seen happening time and time again, to the point where, in addition to the physical destruction and dehumanization of our people, we also see efforts to erase, as I mentioned, any trace of the existence of the Armenian people, through destruction of our cultural heritage, our churches, our monuments dating back thousands of years, to try and revise the history of the region to where Armenians were never present there to begin with. And I think that's probably going to be a very recurring theme in this discussion of genocide today, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Alex. And in regards to the Armenian situation, and it leads into our next question, and you guys all probably are aware if you know anything about the Armenian genocide, but we've been, the perpetrators of the genocide are afraid of the G word, right? Calling it genocide because of the implications on their image or the legal implications. There's almost like the G word gatekeeping. Who does this constitute genocide? Is this a genocide or is it not? Is it just people suffering, let's say? So I'd actually like to start with Raihan, because you were mentioning earlier how you don't like to use the term genocide, but you still need to use it for legal reasons or for justice to prevail. And could you tell us, also because you have an international law background, how is genocide determined? Who is given the authority to make the determination? And what does that mean for your community? And for communities experiencing genocide today? Sorry.
Yes, thank you so much for the question. It's a really good one. And despite I don't want to use it as just a sister, because my brother is right now living the nightmare, and including the rest of my family members. As an attorney, I do believe language matters, our word matters, and to reflect the the depths of the suffering of human beings. Like at the moment that the Uyghurs in these concentration camps, we're talking about the concentration camps that existed in World War II, and now like Uyghur people are reliving it. That's why I think it's truly important that I do justice to the human suffering. It's not up to me or up to any of us to trivialize this unspeakable human suffering. That's why I think, when the crime meets the legal definition, it's important that we call it as such. And historically, I think, if we look at the Genocide Convention and often, at the UN Security Council, like they try to like designate a fact-finding mission and form like this kind of dispatching fact-finding mission or these kind of small bodies to come to conclusion and to find what's happening, whether the crime amounts to genocide. And often, although they are not called as a body that designates the crime as such, often their conclusion do say it is a genocide or not. So that's often how it happens. But China sits, as everybody know, at the UN Security Council, so Uyghur people are deprived of such means. And not only in the case of the Uyghurs, I think in the case of Myanmar too, the Chinese government actually vetoed a lot of these kind of mechanisms that were available for the Rohingya community. So, and then there's another means, which is through these like UN court convention courts. For instance, like we've seen this in the case of like former Yugoslavia tribunal and all these sort of things. But again, it is appointed by the UN. That's why it makes it so tricky when we have these like permanent bodies sitting on the Security Council to make sure that those mechanisms that are not available. And third option is that countries can also make a policy determination. And the case of the plight of Uyghurs, look, obviously the United States, Netherlands, and including the UK, and UK has not done so in the past. I think they use, I believe, the word genocide with against the Islamic State, and that is even rare. And as a result of this, there was a nationwide debate in the UK whether they should amend to include like this kind of genocide determination. And there was like some party members did actually oppose to it and saying that the court should be given this power to designate something as genocide or not. So you have like these kind of actually like venues available, but again, depending on, and especially in the case of ongoing genocide like the Uyghurs at the moment, I think sometimes you're left with very limited choices just because of these powerful states sitting at the UN Security Council.
No, it's very true, and it's pretty much what we all experience in terms of our challenges with getting our justice. Saifullah, could you also comment on the same question, or if anything, update us on the Rohingya situation? Have you guys gone through similar methods through the UN? Is it declared as a genocide?
Yes. Lack of accountability for the perpetrators of atrocity crimes against civilians in Burma is more than atrocities. And then one of the things, I am not going into details of the Rohingya genocide because all the genocide like Armenian genocide, Uyghur genocide, Tigray, all have if it is not the same, but it's similar. So actually, accurately leveling the genocide and acknowledging the reality of atrocity crime is difficult for the international government because genocide convention require them to take actions. We all know that, to prevent and stop genocide. Once they becomes aware, it's happening. The governments who are reluctant to intervene into the foreign countries will avoid accepting this. Recently, I think you heard of the Uyghur genocide results in the Canadian Parliament. It is that's why I say genocide is a word with the political statements, with the political consequence. But the level of genocide the absence of genocide level doesn't mean a genocide is not taking place. And so many people's international community events, Rehan mentioned just now, even some Muslim community, they don't recognize the genocide because there's always politics there, and China is always there for the Uyghur genocide and Rohingya genocide. And the Rohingya refugee are civilian victims of the brutal deportations just now. It is Myanmar's military that has created these problems, and international community like UN fact-finding missions, they have a lot of report, and they have already sent thousands of special envoy to the Myanmar, and they talked the case already brought to the ICJ. The international community has not been prepared to offer chances for any kind of solutions yet. And another one thing is in 2017, the Rohingya faced a genocidal assault, which is a hurdle, hardens Myanmar soldiers that was characterized by arbitrary murder, arrest, and sickening campaigning of sexual violence. That the Rohingya people were unable to protect themselves from assaults by well-armed soldiers. And the situation is the same today. Nobody knows how we felt and suffer when we lost many innocent souls in Burma. And if you visit the camps, if you do have an opportunity in the refugee camp in Bangladesh, there are widows, orphans, rape victims, all type of peoples you can see. Even though the government, military, civilian push us hard to driven us out of the Myanmar and kill our loved ones, we still went in solidarity with the Burmese people. I think the coup is going on in Burma for their democratic transitions. It is still our wish to forgive and forget, to move past the manufactured conflict and return to the peaceful and cohabitation once it worked for everyone. So earlier, the military barriers, the government policy hurdle, constitutional block, now everything is equal because the civilian people, the civilian governments, they can recognize the Rohingya people, but they are still reluctant to recognize the Rohingya as their ethnic group, as a citizens. Or another one things, I think you all heard that Aung San Suu Kyi, who was the leader of the civilian government, she herself came to ICJ and defended the military who raped, and it is not a rape, she personally told. But just now, her party is saying that she did all the things because of fear of the military. But now, where's the fear? She is under arrest now, and her party is still reluctant to recognize the Rohingya people. So that's why it is really complicated, and it needs a lot of hard work, resistance from the Rohingya community, as we have been doing now. We have been telling the Burmese people just now, if you want a more and healthier, more participation is needed. At this moment, humanizing one another is very important, not only for the Rohingya, for all over the world who have been facing genocide and who have been just watching on the televisions. We need to see one another as a human being. It is not going to take a serious, systematic, far-reaching effort to create the conditions of peace and understanding that will need for us forever returns. So that's how we expect from the international community, but the result is on your eyes. You know that what's going on everywhere. Thank you.
No, you made a good point, and we'll see how our efforts tend to be also internationally pointed, and but at the end of the day, we want the government that's perpetrating to accept what's happened, the genocide itself, because that's where the real justice and the real healing is going to begin. Meaza, I wanted to ask, since what's happening in Tigray is, let's say, the most recent to begin occurring the genocide there. How is the community moving forward in terms of it getting determined or classified as genocide? What does it mean for your community right now as it's going on?
Yeah, as all other speakers have rightfully mentioned, unfortunately, those who get to determine an atrocity as a genocide or not are most of the time intergovernmental institutions or governments that are responsible for the prevention of genocide, or when it occurs, they're also responsible to put an end to it. And the people, like those who are at the receiving end of the genocide, do not have any say whatsoever on how these discussions go within the intergovernmental organizations. And because of that, despite the very strong campaigning we have been doing to date, starting November 1st all the way to now, the UN hasn't really designated what's happening to the people of Tigray as a genocide. They haven't even had a regular meeting to discuss the Tigray genocide on the regular agenda. They only did that only once or twice ever since the genocide started on November 1st. Most of the times, they have been discussing the Tigray issue under, other businesses. And what that means is it doesn't even give them the legal obligation to discuss everything that's happening in Tigray in detail and find a solution. And it's mainly because there is lack of political will from all the member states of the UN Security Council and other intergovernmental institutions. But what has been done to date is, particularly the US government has recognized what's happening to the people of Tigray as ethnic cleansing, mainly because the Amhara militias and Eritrean troops, as well as the Ethiopian National Army, has been involved in land grabbing, forcing people to deny their Tigrayan identity by issuing them an Amhara ID card and literally forcing them to denounce that they're Tigrayans and to, adopt a new kind of identity. At the same time, girls have been, raped, gang raped by military officers, and those military officers, particularly those from the Amhara region, as they raped them, they were recorded. This is an account of a rape survivor. They were telling them that they were doing it in order to cleanse their Tigrayan identity, to Amharanize them, to change who they are. So because of this, the US government has recognized what's happening to the people of Tigray as ethnic cleansing. Nobody else is calling it by its rightful name, which is a genocide. Because at the end of the day, genocide is nothing but it's an intentional killing and massacre, extermination of a group of people. And what's happening to the people of Tigray is exactly that. As I said earlier, out of the 5.7 million Tigrayans, 5.2 of them are facing a man-made famine. People are dying in their sleep. They're not waking up, mainly because the roads to, deliver humanitarian aid have been blocked by the Ethiopian National Army, the Amhara militias, and the Eritreans. And whatever the farmers had in their store has been looted by Eritrean troops. And it had, farms have been burned, crops have been burned, hospitals have been destroyed. So people do not have any access whatsoever to, much needed life-saving supplies, and because of that, they're dying. This is mainly because not because there aren't people or humanitarian organizations that are willing to provide that help, but because the Ethiopian government has weaponized starvation and hunger, like it did in so many other incidents, and they're preventing the delivery of this humanitarian aid. At the same time, as I said earlier, girls are being gang raped in mass numbers, aimed at destroying that Tigrayan identity. At the same time, boys as young as 12 years old are being collected from their houses and massacred right in front of their parents. And this is all aimed at, erasing the Tigrayan identity and the people of Tigray. So despite we have been, I want to emphasize how vocal the people of Tigray have been, particularly those in the diaspora. We have been, having protests everywhere, including at the headquarters of the UN organization in New York and elsewhere in the world. We have been having Twitter campaigns. We have been reaching out to all policymakers, highlighting what exactly is happening, proving with an evidence. And international media organizations such as the CNN, BBC, France 24, and what have you have been reporting all of this. However, the international community seems to be very hesitant to call what's happening to the people of Tigray by its rightful name. And this is, again, mainly because calling it a genocide, calling it for what it is going to, come up with other responsibilities of stopping it and also protecting the survivors. But obviously, the intergovernmental institutions and this Western governments are not willing to do that because they're putting their political interests and national interests that they might have in Ethiopia ahead of protecting human rights and holding genocidal regimes accountable. So it's very sad to see, but the people of Tigray, particularly the diaspora, continues to, push relevant actors to take a firm stand on what's happening to the people of Tigray and call it for what it is as a genocide. But I also wanted to touch upon what Alex said earlier, how genocide started by creating an enemy out of a group of people that are intended to be exterminated. The same thing happened with Tigrayans. For such a long time, we were painted as this, chosen people. We were painted as this minority group who wanted to control Ethiopia and everything that it has, but that's completely false. That's completely out of the truth. However, the current regime in Ethiopia has employed national TV and radio stations and magazines publishing documentaries aimed at dehumanizing the people of Tigray, so that people find it easy and convenient to exterminate a whole entire ethnic city. So it's very sickening what's happening, and the reluctance and the inaction of the international community continues to embolden the genocidal regimes in Ethiopia and Eritrea to inflict more pain, more havoc and suffering upon the people of Tigray. But despite all of this, inaction, we'll continue to fight for our people and to amplify their plight until justice is served to them.
Thank you, Meaza. And, we're talking about the determinants coming from international institutions and bodies, but what's interesting, Meaza, is I think a week or so ago, the Ethiopian Orthodox patriarch called it a genocide in Tigray, and I remember as an Armenian when the Catholic Pope even, called it for what it was. And that has its effect and that has its impact as well. So those are also important bodies.
Actually, if I may add one point on that. So after the patriarch called what's happening with its rightful name and told the world that, people are being exterminated in the dark, there has been mounting death threats upon him. The Ethiopian federal government is working day and night to kill that particular pope and also to sideline him, mainly because they're literally trying to associate him with the Ethiopian Orthodox Church because he spoke up, he told the truth. So in Ethiopia, if you say anything against what's happening to the people of Tigray, you're designated as a terrorist and you're right away cancelled out, and the government will do everything in its power to silence you and also to kill you. So we fear very much for the safety and well-being of the patriarch as well.
When you said the term terrorist, we all kind of moved our heads because I think we've all been called a terrorist for speaking out against injustice. But Alex, feel free to comment on what we were just talking about, but I wanted to kind of ask you a side question. So, since the Armenian genocide has been denied for so long, and countries have sidestepped the G word for not calling for what it is, what is the impact of it not being classified as genocide in your experience in the Armenian community?
I think there are a couple of different ways to approach a question like that. I wanted to go back to what both Meaza and Raihan had said in terms of the importance of language. And Meaza had mentioned ethnic cleansing as a term that had been used. And a lot of people don't realize that ethnic cleansing as a term was popularized by Slobodan Milosevic, who was one of the Yugoslav war criminals who perpetrated or ordered the destruction of the Bosnian community during the Yugoslav war. So you have a genocide perpetrator creating a term that is designed to sanitize and downplay the severity of a crime against humanity to make it sound less a criminal act and more a necessity for a state to undertake for its national security, which is how it was justified both in terms of the Bosnian wars, but also throughout history. It's often seen as a securitizing sort of phenomenon. So that in itself is a form of denial. Even if you're recognizing that massacres and ethnic cleansing are taking place, not using the term genocide to accurately describe what is taking place is in itself denial, because you are providing cover to the perpetrators. And I think that goes to what you were saying, Haig, about what the impact has been for our community. Impunity, I think, is the defining factor behind this. Denial creates impunity. It creates an environment in which perpetrator states see that their actions can be excused or fly under the radar of the international community and perpetrate again. It leads to the repetition of that crime against humanity. So when you don't have accountability, when you don't have structures of recognition in place, that enables or creates an environment in which those states are given basically carte blanche to do whatever they want. As you mentioned, with the Armenian genocide has been denied by Turkey, I mean, for the last 160 years. And that was not only the fault of Turkey, but it's also been the fault of the international community in upholding and enforcing Turkey's denial of the genocide, in providing Turkey with the cover in order to deny and erase this history. So for the Armenian people, the struggle has been both about the recognition of our rights in the context of Turkey and justice for the survivors of the genocide, but also in having the international community be prepared to call Turkey out for its abuses too. And getting to the theme of this conversation, which is the politicization of genocide, I think the Armenian genocide is most unfortunately a very good example of how genocide has been politicized, because in many ways it was the first modern genocide, and of course an inspiration for the coining of the term genocide, but it's also one of the longest denied genocides in history. And the United States, for example, which is the domain in which we work as the ANCA, I don't believe that in the course of our advocacy, we have ever encountered politicians, Congress members, senators, whoever, who have to our face, maybe in the last couple of decades, denied outright that the genocide is taking place, or that the genocide had taken place. Rather, they chose not to make that determination or refer to it as genocide because of their vested political interests, security interests, geopolitical interests in maintaining a close relationship with Turkey. So genocide has become part of this sort of, or treated as if it's a commodity that can be bartered over, that if Turkey doesn't want it to be recognized, Turkey can have its way if it says, well, we won't give the US or NATO access to an airbase in southern Turkey. Now, that has obviously resulted in a huge amount of trauma for our community, seeing that many of us are survivors, descendants of survivors of the genocide, that the reason that we find ourselves in the United States or in the diaspora generally is not by choice, but by the fact that we have been forced out of our ancestral homes, and that we, of course, experience trauma when we see what is happening to our communities in Armenia and in Artsakh today. But that denial has allowed that process of genocide to continue. The inability to call it for what it is and recognize genocide for what it is has just provided license to these governments to continue that, not only against our communities, we might add. When you fail to hold one country to account, you create this global system of impunity that affects every single community that is struggling against the issue of genocide. When you put these high thresholds and the ability to recognize and call out and determine what a genocide is or isn't, particularly when those thresholds are linked to geopolitical interests, it becomes very difficult for communities to truly stand up to that systematic oppression, because they're not only dealing with a perpetrator state, they're also dealing with a conspiracy of states at an international level seeking to deny that crime against humanity. So we see that happening today in the case of Turkey. I mean, Turkey is not only sponsoring Azerbaijan's ongoing persecution and genocidal violence against the Armenians of Artsakh, it's also perpetrating genocidal crimes against the Kurds of northern Syria through its occupation, the Kurds of Iraq through its ongoing assault on Iraq. It's been targeting Yazidi genocide survivors in Iraq as well, in the Sinjar region, and has in fact recently signed into law a piece of legislation that allowed it to deport Uyghur refugees back to China, which, I mean, you can see how in the case of one state that has been that there has been a failure to hold accountable for its historic crimes against humanity, continues to engage in this process, not just with regards to the Armenians, but with regards to many other communities. And I think other states see that take place and are inspired by it. And without belaboring the point too much, the Holocaust, the motivations for which were very closely tied to that history of the Armenian genocide and the impunity that Turkey experienced in the wake of the genocide. Hitler once famously said, "Who today, after all, remembers the Armenians?" the day before he invaded Poland and commenced the Holocaust, which I think is a very grueling example of how, a very shocking example of how impunity can inspire and inform the perpetration of other crimes against humanity. So that's why I think these sorts of panels and creating global solidarity movements to confront the perpetration of genocide are incredibly important, because it's something that affects all of us. One perpetrator state getting away with it enables other perpetrator states to get away with it too. And of course, international silence on the perpetration of one genocide only creates an environment in which it is permissible for the international community to deny others. So recognition of the Armenian genocide by the United States was a very important step forward, not just for the Armenian people in their quest for justice, but also at an international level in raising the response to atrocity prevention to a moral and political imperative, and by saying that we will no longer allow human rights to be treated as a sort of commodity that can be bartered over politically, that we are willing to say that relations with the US or other states are not contingent upon or cannot be contingent upon the United States acting as a cover for the perpetration of crimes against humanity. Unfortunately, though, the Armenian people, very shortly after seeing the genocide recognized, also saw the United States provide or authorize military assistance to Azerbaijan, which kind of shows how far the battle we have ahead of us really is, and how far we still need to go. Because supporting one genocide perpetrator today while simultaneously condemning the actions of another genocide perpetrator kind of cancels each other out. We need to really see genocide recognition inform policy. And I think that's something that is a universal when it comes to this discussion. Recognition is important. Recognition is incredibly important because it creates an environment of accountability and ends that impunity that other states benefit from. But ultimately, there needs to be some sort of material action or political action to prevent the ongoing crimes against humanity. Recognition is the first step, but there's certainly a lot more that needs to be done beyond that point to ensure that those crimes are ended or resolved. Obviously, we want to see these crimes being perpetrated today end, but at the same time, we want to ensure that they don't even come about in the first place, so that they can be prevented, so that there is a from the beginning, from the ground up, a real effort to identify genocides before they occur. Some sort of early warning system it might be, but we need to think about how we can identify these very clear examples and warning signs of genocide, like dehumanization, like the erasure of history, like the destruction of culture, like this vilification of communities, to ensure that it doesn't escalate to that point of genocide. And unfortunately, the international community has done a very bad job of doing that.
Yeah, no, there needs to be a precedent put out there by the world community, but politics and the greed of nations and political expediency tends to triumph, unfortunately. But thank you, Alex. You touched upon like the politicization. I wanted to also have everyone else comment on that. Raihan, why is genocide so politicized, and what are the geopolitical factors driving the politicization for your community? How has it played a factor in the Uyghur genocide?
You know, as I mentioned earlier, and I think this point is truly worth reinforcing, and I think it's incredibly important for the international community to reckon with. I mean, China is not only an international actor and major driver of these, international trades and engagement, but also that China has a huge power at the UN Security Council, and China was able to reshape the rules. You know, the Chinese government used language so-called universal human rights. So it truly, I think, over the past few years, especially during the Trump administration, United States and understanding some of the background, if you look at the UN Human Rights Council, it is indeed have many countries that are right now actually form the UN Human Rights Council are actually known for engaging in any sort of like human rights abuses in their own countries. And the Trump administration said, so what is the point of having the UN Human Rights Council when countries like Syria or Sudan or all these countries form this very unusual body, but it's called like Human Rights Council. What happens, I think, as a result of it, I mean, I think I can understand the rationale, but I don't think that was a good idea. So when the US retreated from the UN Human Rights Council, it created the opportunity for the Chinese government to manipulate and engage with other countries to form a kind of a very, very favorable opinion towards its repression against the Uyghur community. So what happened is that, in light of this, the crimes against humanity perpetrated against the Uyghur people, Western countries, especially leading democracies, came out and issued a very strong letter, unanimously condemning the Chinese government's repression. And in response, the Chinese government formed its own coalition. But this coalition has countries like Syria, like, Qatar. I think Qatar, like, later, actually, it withdrew from this. But many countries, like especially in Africa and also in Muslim countries that are known for its own human rights abuses, to support, not only actually they were complicit, but they actually end up supporting the Chinese government. And they issued their own separate letter. And, honestly, I mean, those countries, like none of that, I mean, if we, as speaking within the human rights norm, we wouldn't look at those countries as a shining example of like upholding universal human rights values. But we know those countries and what they stand for. But the Chinese government really manipulated and to say that, you know what, if I am committing crimes against humanity, or there is a repression against the Uyghur community, wouldn't these would these Muslim countries would actually side with me? And we all know the answer, because of China's economic might and economic clout, and as well as influence in these countries. And as over the past year, for instance, like vaccine diplomacy is something that we've seen, like the Chinese government offered, that they're going to provide a vaccine to many developing countries. And although it sometimes still calls itself as a developing country, which is kind of like ironic in many respects. So it really, I mean, I think, especially some view it as a Marshall Plan, and some, I mean, I don't know to what extent it is a goodwill gesture to the betterment of the world, to create this Belt and Road project connecting East-West, the West, and or connecting the entire world. The idea of Belt and Road project actually created a lot of opportunities for the Chinese government to buy in the conscience of the international community. Whenever the Chinese government provided infrastructure or something, there's always a gain. It never came in as like an aid that, has no cost or nothing, no strings attached. There's always something. In Kenya, the Chinese government even bought up the 20% of the media. And I think it's scary. Like when, I mean, countries in Africa, while they have their own flaws, at least there is independent judiciary, and I mean, there is an somewhat independent media, but then your media is bought up by a foreign government to portray a favorable view of its own, and that creates a problem. So that's what happened, and I think that's why the Chinese government, and especially against the Uyghurs, I mean, unlike any other countries, that we have to reckon with this reality that we are talking about world superpower. And, not only the countries, I think, and the politicization of this issue, it's beyond the politicization, because it involves many actors that remain silent. I mean, we know that, like what's happening to Uyghur people, like close to mind, like many, like Darfur and so forth. But those celebrities, like the ideals that they pursue in the entertainment industry to like speak up for injustice, like the Safe Darfur campaign, or this powerful 1989 protests, all this song that they made, none of that took place when it comes to Uyghur people. And we know that, again, it is because the Chinese economy, like Hollywood, obviously, China has a huge stake in Hollywood. Chinese market, any actor or actress or Hollywood movie, to be able to even broadcast in China, you cannot speak against China, and that's something that these celebrities know very well. And LeBron James is another great example of this. When the NBA, often prides itself like being the guardian and champion for truth, and standing up for injustice, they couldn't do so when it comes to China. And they even explicitly said that we have to think about the financial ramifications. So and that's why, like, I felt like the Uyghur issue in many ways, I think, truly something that, it's so profound, but I think it really shattered the globe's image of how, when it comes to our own moral conviction, we can not only look the other way, we end up even endorsing it just because there is a cost to it. Standing up and speaking up against, like, racial inequity in America doesn't come as a price. Actually, you are standing up for something. You are also enchanted. But when it comes to countries like China, you could be blocked from the international market that actually provides you lucrative opportunities. And we have seen in the cases of many business examples. And last point was Disney as a prime example of this. Not only they actually filmed the Mulan in part of Xinjiang, where I'm from, where there is these mass internment camps. But at the same time, at the end of the movie, they thanked the very agency that facilitated these internment camps. And to this date, the Uyghur community has not received a single apology from Disney, and it's still operating in Shanghai. And the whole thing is just like, when it comes to China, I think obviously it presents many geopolitical challenges. I mean, even Europe, let alone, like, the Muslim countries or countries like Africa, where they are very much dependent on Chinese economy and Chinese aid. Even Western leaders took a long time to come to this reckoning. And precisely because our economy is so much integrated, Chinese economy is like very much well integrated with Western economy. And, all this, a lot of our products, like, global supply chain over the years moved to China, because believing at that time that economic integration will lead to China being more democratized, and none of that took place. Instead, what was incorporated into Chinese system? Forced labor. The Uyghur people are now like being worked against their will in these concentration camps, and many camps actually have these forced labor factories integrated into camps, or sometimes they were removed from the home that they're familiar with to other cities and working against their will. And if they don't, then their family members could be sent to these camps. So unfortunately, it is our global economy that is so much integrated with the Chinese economy that is preventing the world to really take action or speak up against a powerful nation such as China.
Now, you made a great point about, because the political interests in this capitalist world are the economic interests, and we can probably see this in most of our cases, where it's really because, how you said, the interconnected global economy, that's what's pulling the strings at the end of the day. Even in terms of reparations and stuff, it's financial, it's a lot of it's economics. And China's pull is like one of the largest in terms of major powers, even to the point where I'd expect Turkey as another Turkic nation to stand up for them, and they've lacked on that subject. That's how much of a pull they have. So, Meaza, if you could comment on, how has the Tigrayan genocide been politicized, and what are the geopolitical factors with that politicization for your community?
The ongoing Tigray genocide has been politicized way before it even started. It has become an ideological battleground between the federal government of Ethiopia and other nation and nationalities within the country. This particular genocide started because, on the one hand, you have federal government and an ethnic group and elites from, particularly from the Amhara, who are hell-bent on establishing an Ethiopia that doesn't recognize the differences and the diversity and the identity people have within Ethiopia. And so by that, they wanted to establish a pan-Ethiopia that is governed by a very strong central government, whereby one single person would have the most autonomous rule over everything, and then literally the other ethnic groups wouldn't even be able to, speak their language, have governments or representatives that speak their language and come from their ethnic group. On the other hand, you have a group of people, including the Tigray people, who are very determined to have their right to self-determination and self-administration respected and coexist along other nation and nationalists in the country peacefully. This has been, employed in the past 30 years by establishing ethnic federalism system in the country. However, the current Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, turned into a genocidal regime, once he came to power, he disseminated this political system, this arrangement that has enabled the people of Tigray to coexist despite their differences. So the genocide has been a political issue from the get-go. And after that, you see most of the Horn African countries being implicated either politically or militarily in the ongoing genocide of Tigray. For example, Eritrea, a neighboring country, is actively involved on the genocide, not only in its happening, but also in its making, in the planning. The Eritrean president, Isaias Afwerki, was very instrumental in drafting the overall design of the genocide, and his troops are actively massacring people, gang raping women, and looting resources and destroying the whole region as we know it. At the same time, you have Somali, whose troops have been forced to participate in the ongoing genocide in Tigray. At the same time, we have United Arab Emirates that has sponsored drones and other weapons of destruction that have been very instrumental in massacring thousands and thousands of Tigrayan people starting November 1st. At the same time, there are so many other countries. Sudan is also another country that has been implicated on the ongoing genocide. I say this to show how far-reaching the impact of the Tigray genocide is. One thing the international community seems to fail to understand is how their inaction in holding the perpetrators of the Tigray genocide accountable is going to destabilize the Horn of Africa entirely, and also maybe the global peace and security order. Because Ethiopia, during the late Prime Minister Meles Zenaw's era, has been one of the strong, prominent stabilizing factor in the Horn of Africa. The Ethiopian government during the Meles Zenaw's era was very effective in clearing Somalia from, Al-Shabaab and other terrorist groups. They have been very successful in establishing a strong, booming economy that, uplifted the lives of thousands and thousands of Ethiopians. However, now with the new administration in office, that was not elected, by the way. The current Prime Minister of Ethiopia was selected by the political party called Imperative. He came to power and destroyed every system that was working for Ethiopia, despite its, failures. So the whole genocide has been very much politicized, and even the Ethiopian government to this date calls it as a law and order operation, and not even a war, not even a civil war. So the international community owes to do better in terms of, seeing what are the political factors that are playing out in this extermination of an entire group of people, and what are, the consequences of their inaction. Because the mere fact that the international community is shying away from the political root cause of the problem and mainly focusing on the humanitarian crisis aspect of this problem is giving more incentive to the Ethiopian regime to even continue to mask its hidden agenda of exterminating the people of Tigray under law and order operation, and that is not happening at all, not only to the people of Tigray but also for the overall peace and security of the Horn of Africa. So as we speak, Ethiopia is in a border dispute with Sudan. Ethiopia is having some kind of disagreement with Egypt. So the Horn of Africa, as we know it, is turning into, a zone of chaos and destabilization. And that is not going to affect only the people of Tigray or even Ethiopians, but also the Horn of Africa as a the Horn of Africa and Africa as a continent, and also the international community. So I think it's about time that, the intergovernmental institutions such as the UN put their political and ideological differences aside and focus on protecting the innocent lives that are perishing in the dark. Because what we have seen in the previous two UN Security Council meetings is that you see Japan and Russia and China trying to go against, their ideological opponents on the case of Tigray. Not merely because I don't think the Chinese government or the Russian would have anything particular against the people of Tigray. However, because initiatives are being taken mainly by the European members of the European Union and also the American government, you see these two countries going against any initiative and blocking everything that could actually could have brought some semblance of hope to the people of Tigray. So the Tigray genocide is yet again being used as a battleground for superpowers because this hegemonic powers are putting aside their main responsibility to protect innocent lives, and it's becoming an ideological battleground. But overall, the Tigray genocide is highly politicized, again, because some of the reasons we think why the international community is very much hesitant and taking action and holding the Ethiopian government accountable for all the atrocious war crimes and crimes against humanity it has been committing to date is because they want to see a stable and strong Ethiopia, and they think the current prime minister is going to deliver that for them. But this prime minister has been in office for almost 3 years now, and the only thing that he was able to achieve in the country is chaos and massacre in every corner of the country. The people that are, we talk about Tigray genocide because the magnitude of the pain is so much big, but at the same time, it's very important to remember and to realize that massacres are happening everywhere in the country. There is chaos everywhere in the country. This prime minister doesn't have the legitimacy nor the capacity or even the authority to maintain peace and security within the country, because there are movements aimed at gaining autonomy, because the federal government under Abiy Ahmed is forcing people to deny their identity and become something that they're not. He is actively working to force people to change who they are. So because of that, there is chaos and destabilization everywhere aimed at changing the whole political atmosphere of the country. And the West needs to recognize this. The current prime minister and his regime that the West is supporting is not going to deliver a strong, united, and stable Ethiopia. If anything, he is actively facilitating the destruction and dismantling of the whole country, which is going to be very, very consequential to the international community. So even you see countries such as, Canada and others trying to support the upcoming election that the current genocidal regime in Ethiopia is working on. This is an election aimed at, legitimizing the genocidal regime in Ethiopia. It's not aimed at giving the people of Ethiopia an opportunity to vote for a political party or a political ideology that they think would help them to have a better life, because all of the viable candidates, all of the viable political, opposition groups have been either killed or are in prison right now. Particularly when it comes to the people of Tigray, the only political party that over 2.7 million people have voted for in November 9 of 2020 is fighting for the well-being and protection and survival of the people of Tigray. At the same time, when you look into the Oromo people, the biggest ethnic group in Ethiopia, their main opposition political groups, a political group and political activists that have massive legitimacy and support from their people are in prison. So we don't even know what kind of election is going to happen, and people are not even registering. However, you see Western governments that are helping on supporting the genocidal regime in Ethiopia, making excuses and helping the government to have a very firm ground that would enable it further continuing its political oppression and genocidal activities upon the people of Tigray. So it's very, very imperative that the West, particularly countries like France, Italy, Spain, and Germany and Canada, recognize that this genocidal regime in Ethiopia doesn't have any legitimacy whatsoever, and supporting any initiative it takes, be it election or anything, is only going to exacerbate the suffering of innocent people and facilitate the destabilization of the whole country.
Mm-hmm. No, the assimilative policy that we see in almost all of our cases is genocidal. I mean, you see that as a common theme where minorities are just trying to hold on to their identity, and their identity is at threat. Saifullah, briefly, can you also give us how the Rohingyan situation has been politicized, or briefly?
Thank you. I will go so briefly because all you mentions are really related to the Rohingya issue. In terms of politics, in terms of economy, with China, everything's mixed with the Burmese politics and Rohingya genocide. When a genocide, you allow a genocide to occur in one country, it emboldens criminals elsewhere to commit atrocity crimes. In Myanmar's case, an international failure to intervene to help the Rohingya in 2017 or before that, especially the regional countries like ASEANs, encouraged Temodor. I mean, Temodor means the Burmese military, to believe they could get away with anything domestically and could avoid meaningful international censure. And that's why they believe that they could get away with the recent military coup in Myanmar. The regional country were responsible for the Rohingya genocide too. Preventing genocide is not just about preventing further violence. Now there is a very little window and change I see in the Rohingya genocide in Burma. It's still uncertain future we have seen, because the military coup is taking another directions, and the Rohingya genocide issue is taking another directions. And they have been fighting for democracy. We have been fighting for our recognitions, identity, our citizenship, repatriation of 1 million people, more than 1 million people to Burma again, human trafficking, education, healthcare, most importantly, ICT case at The Hague. If I briefly say how this genocide was politicized, Aung San Suu Kyi, the leader of the civilian government, support the military's brutal campaign. She said against the Rohingya, and went beyond what would have been necessary for her to replicate the military. She was presented herself to the public in Myanmar and numerous instances as an enthusiastic supporters of the military, even though she knew that this military did a genocide. She had presented herself, at the Court of Justice, at the ICJ, personally defended the military actions against accusation of genocide. That means as she tried to make fool or to divert the attention of international community from the Rohingya genocide. She herself has been saying this is not a genocide yet. That means genocide, you don't need to kill all the peoples to confirm it is a genocide. The genocidal intent from the international community, international fact-finding missions were supportive, but still she is saying this is not even an ethnic cleansing. We have to see, we have to investigate. Before investigating, more than 3 million people the Rohingya have, only 600,000 left in Burma. But the crimes, war crimes, and other crimes against humanity was the price of keeping. If it is the price of keeping the military on site to avoid the coup, in Myanmar, then the price was far too high. I want to say one thing is that if political leaders and other country who so-called, they say the peace-loving countries feel the need of they need to defend the genocide. For example, say in Ethiopia, in China, or in Myanmar, and then the system is broken and needs a fundamental change. Thank you.
No, very much agreed. Very well said, Saifullah. And I think Raihan had mentioned this before too, and how a lot of countries around the world, especially the major powers, they have blood on their hands too, and they're also guilty of their own past and their own crimes. And they don't have an interest in always supporting the self-determination of minority groups, because maybe they also have those issues as well. So these factors play into a lack of action and the politicization of genocide. But you guys, we do have each other. I'll say that we'll support each other. I do want each one of you to kind of tell us how the audience and us as also organizers, how we can help you and your organization and your community's cause. Maza, if you could start, please.
Yeah, sure. I think our audience and everybody who is watching this live stream can help the people of Tigray in our fight to stop the ongoing state-sponsored genocide by, first of all, educating yourself about what's happening and making sure that the information you're getting is the right one. And you can do it by, going to omnitigray.org. It's our website whereby we push an educated advocacy. And after, you educate yourself about the genocide, become an ally, use your voice to advocate for the innocent people of Tigray that are being exterminated in the dark. You can do that by participating in the targeted Twitter campaigns we hold at all times. And you can also do that by reaching out to your local government representatives, letting them know that you're very much worried about the genocide happening in Tigray, and that you would want them to take an action and save innocent lives. You can also support, humanitarian agencies that are on the ground trying to support survivors of, the genocide. They could be working with refugees in Sudan, or even Tigrayans that are internally displaced and currently in a very congregated and really bad situation in camps, be it in Maqala, the capital city of Tigray, or others. So you can donate to these organizations. But most importantly, the key thing here that we want is for people to know about what's happening to the innocent people of Tigray, and that can be done by raising awareness. So we interest in you all to become ambassadors, to become the voice of the people of Tigray. Wherever you go, talk about the genocide and lead them to omnitigray.org so that they can have access to more information. And at the same time, attending the protests we organize in different parts of the world is also another sign of solidarity. For example, on May 21 and 22nd, we're having a nationwide 2 days protest in San Francisco, the Bay Area. So anyone who's around that area, please make the trip and stand by the people of Tigray, because that day is going to mark 200 days since the genocide started on the people of Tigray, where a lot of people are dying, a lot of children are, unaccounted for. A lot of young girls as young as 4 years old are being gang raped, and as old as 89 years old are being gang raped, where fathers are being forced to rape their own kids at a gunpoint, where young men and children are being killed, and where people don't, that they're dying not only of the constant bombing and shelling, but also of starvation and lack of medication. And a lot of us in the diaspora haven't even heard from our family members in the past 6 months. We're doing this work as we carry the burden of not knowing the well-being or not knowing the whereabouts of our family members. We don't know if our family members are alive or dead, but we also know that we don't have the option but to keep going, to stay strong for our people and to advocate for their well-being and safety. So we would appreciate your voice and your support in our struggle.
Of course. Follow OmniTigray to follow their events, you guys. Raihan, how could we support your community and your issues?
Yeah, first, I just want to add 2 points, because just going back to your earlier question, and something that I think I really want everybody to, when we go home and days ahead, just think about these issues quite deeply, because in Chinese, there's the term crisis often translate or express as Weiji, which means crisis creates an opportunity. And for the Uyghur crisis, I think for far too long, the Chinese government also used the global war on terror towards its advantage and paint this a proud community as extremist terrorists and separatists. And I think those dehumanizing language often ultimately created what it is now. So first and foremost, like I do want to, commend all the activists, like, regardless which community you're coming from, that the fact that you're lending your voice and fighting against any authoritarian government, I think it's incredibly commendable what you're doing, because I know, when we look at the mass atrocities and, community like Uyghurs or Tigray, often people look at through the lens of victimhood. But I think you guys, like, everybody who are engaged in activism are embodiment of heroism, if anything. Like, you're not only victim. And I think it's important that we don't, focus on just the victimhood, but really reflect on the heroic act that these actors and these wonderful people exemplified, like, as leaders of their community, as advocates and human rights champions. So I just want to commend everybody, whether on the stage or behind the stage, or just even tuning in, trying to learn more how to be better advocates, like all of you, and for the wonderful work that you're doing. And second thing, because I had a tremendous pleasure of meeting with the UN ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, and she ended up quoting me on this point about like seeing any crisis, and especially the diaspora community who are fighting, also like the community fighting inside through the lens of like, not just the victimhood. But she did quote me on something, and I think this is the best way to put it. Rayhan reminded me that this violence doesn't just dehumanize the people it's inflicted upon, it also dehumanizes anyone who stands by and let it happen. And the reason why mass atrocities often are successful is precisely because it is happening in masses. And often it creates this inability on the conscience of the international community that what can we do about it? It's not just one person, it's happening to millions of people. And I think that's why, like, we just become bystanders. And I think that's the worst thing that we can do, because now that people are suffering, right? Like that they're the ones who are actually harmed by, and we cannot just stand idle in the face of mass atrocities, crimes against humanity, or genocide. And last advice is that, oftentimes, while I do believe as an attorney words matter, it's important that, sometimes, yes, we do want to see like determination or designation, but most importantly, we need to focus on what to do about it. How can we stop the suffering and harm that caused against these kind of racial and ethnic group, and to make sure that these community heal after such unspeakable injustice, and hopefully find a path to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Rayhan. Very well said. Saifala, how could we help your community?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And one thing I would like to say is the collaboration among the genocide victims with other genocide victims as well. So outside of this conference, we can make a long-term collaborations with each others. Maybe 6 months, in 6 months and 2 months, we can do some sort of policy making, how to prevent the genocide perpetrators. So what I would say is as a Rohingya community facing the genocide victims and seeing the genocide up close, we are with you. We will be always with you wherever they're facing injustice. And for us, just to know and to learn about the Rohingya community, you can visit rohingya.ca. This is a website we have been running. Our organization is a full-time 100% voluntary organizations. We have been trying to organize a systematic strategy to fight against genocidal perpetrators in Burma, and to work together with other ethnic minorities also facing same persecutions in other countries as well. As being 100% voluntary organizations and also being full-time students, it is so hard for us to run the organizations. We don't need just now. We don't need any financial support. We have been doing well, but the problem is Bangladesh refugee camp. More than 1 million Rohingya refugees living in Bangladesh. they are not allowed to go to school. They are not to go to university. So the youth, the Rohingya student who's supposed to be at the university and college, they see us because we are in Canada, in a stable country and in comfortable place. So they see us, they always call us for opportunity for educations and some sort of supports. But unfortunately, we can't do that. And we feel so guilty for that. So that's why as a young community in Canada or all over the world, we can say, if any one of you know the opportunity, how we make the organization strong, how can we help the Rohingya student with the scholarship in terms of educations, online educations. So if you know anything, any possibility, any opportunity, anyone, please connect with us, and then we can try to build a society, a community, a strong community among ourselves, as we can fight against injustice, against the Burmese military, against Burmese perpetrators who are just taking everything from us. That's all. Thank you so much for doing this.
Of course, Saifullah, and I love that idea of how can we help Rohingyans in Bangladesh get education. That definitely, I feel like, is something tangible that we could actually organize and create for them. And Alex, briefly, maybe because recently the Armenian genocide did get recognized by the United States, but right now Azerbaijan is invading Armenia once again. How could the world, how could other communities kind of help our community?
I think some very important points have been raised already. I mean, I think it's very important for people to be educated and also to cut through the false equivalencies, the false parodies, the types of narratives that are circulated by media that try to present the situations our people are in terms of two sides, that there can be some sort of side in which genocide may be justified in some way. I think we need to be able to cut through every piece of propaganda through educating ourselves, and in particular through amplifying the voices of community advocates like those here today. I mean, it's fantastic to be and a true privilege to be a part of this. Solidarity amongst communities is absolutely important, of paramount importance. I mean, none of us are free until we are all free. We all need to work together against the scourge of genocide as it emerges in the world today. So participating in our campaigns, anca.org, we often have action alerts and means to call your Congress members or to send them emails, or depending on the country you're in, we have Armenian national committees across the world that also organize grassroots advocacy initiatives and campaigns that people can participate in and let their voices be heard to express to their elected leaders, but also different stakeholders at all levels of society. I mean, genocide perpetration is really a conspiracy of complicity that people become willing agents, whether it be at the level of those who are uninformed, to the level of governments, to media, celebrities, academicians, other institutions. We need to fight at every single level of the social hierarchy, every single level of the social system that we are a part of, to combat those false narratives and to amplify the voices of those who are experiencing persecution and those who are allied to them as well. So I think that it's a very personal journey through which people need to go to inform and educate themselves. But there's also this format of participation with these advocacy organizations people need to engage in as well. And I would strongly encourage the audience to engage with every organization and individual here to ensure that process of education and learning can continue. We need to inform ourselves in order to become better activists. And ultimately, like I said, solidarity and working within our communities and outside of our communities is something that we all need to do more of, I think. I mean, I know firsthand from working within the Armenian community that we have focused sometimes being too insular in the way that we look at the issue of genocide, and working together and building these relationships and coalitions is incredibly important. As one united front, we are so much more powerful when it comes to confronting the force of genocide. That while, of course, every genocide is unique and these processes evolve in their own specific ways, there are these common threads: impunity, a lack of accountability, a lack of education, a misrepresentation of these issues, dehumanization as a concept, and ultimately at the root of all of this, the right to self-determination for all peoples that must be upheld. that we can all find solidarity and common struggle in and support each other and each other's organizations. So I hope that this is the beginning of a long, constructive and fruitful dialogue between our communities and organizations, and look forward to the next opportunity that we might be able to engage and come together to raise awareness, bring attention to these issues, and fight for change.
Thank you, Alex, and well said. And we're at an hour 43. I think I want to end it at hour 45 here. And we did get a handful of questions, but a few of the questions have to do, and the reason why I only want to ask one of these is because they were asked multiple times. But it was about gaining public consciousness. How do we get more awareness, education campaigns through social media? How do we get awareness on these issues? And the reason why I want to take it back to Alex is because you're the communications director of an advocacy group. We could start with you real fast, but what are some suggestions on and successful methods of gaining awareness in the United States, especially that in the last 2 years, Congress and the president have recognized the genocide?
I mean, I don't think there's one magic formula. We do a lot of things as an organization. We work together with different community organizations within the Armenian community and other communities as well. But we do various things. We organize demonstrations. We get people out in the streets so our voices can be heard. We engage with media to report on these issues. We write articles and opinion pieces to try and get the word out there and get our community's voice to the forefront of the national agenda. We work with political officers at local, state, and federal levels to ensure that our issues are being heard and being represented at the highest levels of politics in this country. Like I said, there is so much that we need to do as communities that no single community can necessarily bear the sole burden of, and why working together is so important. But I'll give one small anecdote. I was during the commemoration of the genocide here on April 24th this year, was asked by a media representative to respond to the statement of the Turkish government on Armenian Genocide Commemoration Day, denying the Armenian genocide. And I told them that we can't interact with and engage with that sort of denialism. We can't provide a platform to denialism whatsoever, because that gives it legitimacy and gives those narratives credibility. And this is to say that we encounter all sorts of denial, politicization, and efforts to gaslight and erase our historic experience constantly throughout all levels of civil society and the public sphere. And these things need to be confronted. So focusing just on the political domain would be a misstep. I think we need to look at all of the different ways, these systematic structures behind the reinforcement of genocide denial, the reinforcement of the narratives of the perpetrators, and do what we can to combat and confront the normalization of genocide denial as it exists in the world today, particularly in the places like academic institutions and in media that propound these narratives and that are meant to be ostensibly responsible for educating the public, but sometimes can end up reinforcing the trauma of our communities by elevating the narratives and dialogue of communities or states that are engaged in state-sponsored violence. So we need to think of genocide prevention in a much more comprehensive way, in a grassroots way that doesn't just focus exclusively on the political world or the international legal realm, but also all of these levels that sit underneath that can work towards reinforcing those processes. And I think the example of Disney is very tragic, but a really clear demonstration of how deeply insidious the perpetration and denial of genocide is in the world today, and how seemingly innocuous it is that one of the most well-known businesses, companies that produces films would be engaged in this process by reinforcing or legitimizing the government engaged in the genocide of the Uyghur community. It just goes to show how big this battle is for us and how important solidarity is. So I think, I don't know how much more there is to say. We need to be in all places at once, and the only way we can do that is together, united as communities struggling against injustice.
Love it. I also, if anyone else wants to comment, especially on maybe social media, if that's changed or how social media has played a role in bringing awareness to the communities. If anyone would like to comment.
Yeah,
go for it, Saifullah.
yeah, So many people tell social media is bad, but in a way, for our campaigns, social media helps us a lot, because when I came to Canada in 2016, we are trying to go to CBC and CTV and different kind of new channels to help us when we organize a small rally. Nobody comes, nobody knew that. So the social media, after 2017, when we had a campaigns for the protest rally in Toronto, so we expected 100 people. It was about more than 10,000 people came out because of the social media. So just now, we are recognized by the government, by the NGOs, university, and inviting us at the United Nations and different universities of the world, all because of the social media. So I would like to say is that for the audience, for all of us, whoever we are, we can help each other. Just when we see something like about Uyghur, it is not my issue and then leave. No, we shouldn't do like this. We have to do something like at least a like and just share it for someone. It will be benefiting to everyone. That's how today. As I told you, we were all about volunteers. We didn't have any full-time staffs or anything, but still we have been doing all these things because of social media. And one of the results is today I have been talking here because of the social media. So that's how social media benefited our campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you, Saifullah. No, I definitely feel like social media has changed in the last few years, where it's become actually pretty political space. But with that being said, I think we should wrap this up. So, as we all know, it's things look pretty dim these days. We do make progress, but it seems like we're every step forward, there's 2 steps backwards. But days like this, where I get to meet you guys and we get to talk about these issues, and I get to meet people who are doing amazing work, I feel very inspired and motivated. You guys are amazing assets to human rights advocacy and activism. I want to commend you for all your work that you guys do, your selfless work. So I'd like to thank the panelists for your time and all the work that you do for your communities. And we talked about genocide occurring on all corners of the world and all different places, but regardless of their distance and their specific dynamics, they don't exist in vacuums. Each crime against humanity is connected to the other, and a lot of these injustices have common themes and elements. So I'm looking forward to further collaboration, solidarity, and working together, you guys. Thank you. And thank you for everyone here listening. I hope you enjoyed, and this should be on YouTube to watch later on. So share with your friends and support all these organizations. Thank you, guys.